All right.
Cool.
Here we go again.
Yeah.
I think it's number 16 now. Podcast 16.
I think I've lost count, but it should be.
Whenever I put little notes together, then I put the number. So
Yeah.
I think I'm remembering correctly. Okay, so today's book is the Enchiridion by Epictetus. So should I give a quick summary and then we dig into it?
Yeah.
Okay. The Enchiridion was likely compiled by one of Epictetus's students and attributed to Epictetus himself, a prominent Stoic philosopher in the Roman Empire. It's a famous book in the world of Stoic philosophy, a philosophy that focuses on self-control, particularly controlling one's emotions in the face of adversity. The Stoics also emphasize living a life aligned with nature, which loosely equates to living a virtuous life, characterized by the four virtues: wisdom, temperance, justice, and courage. The Enchiridion, translated Handbook or Manual, is a collection of 53 short Stoic lessons meant to be referenced. An example is the opening line: "Some things are within our control, while others are not," commonly referred to as the dichotomy of control, which teaches that we should only let the things that are within our control affect us. And then a quick little side note is that Epictetus himself actually started off as a slave in the Roman Empire, and then he went on to become a prominent Stoic philosopher. So some of the stuff, whether we'll touch on it or not, is a different story, but some of the stuff he talks about slavery and that, and it's interesting to think about because it was quite a common thing back then, and it's interesting to think that he's coming from that perspective at times where he was a slave. So when he talks about it, it's even more of like a real tangible thing for him, not just a hypothetical. Cool. All right, should we kick it off? So we're going to go through a few of the different teachings or lessons, and then
Yeah, just before you go, I think in the opening, I think that was quite interesting where he speaks about what you're in control of and what you're not, and how kind of to deal with things in that regard. I think it's very interesting. I think a lot of people need to be aware of that. I mean, there's the one point where he says people's opinion of you is theirs. It has nothing to do with you, you know. And I think so often most people fail to get out of their comfort zones or step up because they don't want to be judged. But again, you forget that judgment isn't who you are. If you truly know who you are, then that shouldn't really matter, you know. And I think that's one thing that holds a lot of people back. And I think just being aware of what you're in control over and being able to act on, which he kind of mentions a lot, act on things, you know, act on, you know, the best you can, then you should be fine. Anything external, you know, shouldn't really bother you if you truly know yourself.
I mean, I think we might as well start off with that first lesson because it is a great one. And it, like you say, they come back to it again and again and again because it is such a core part of Stoic philosophy, is that dichotomy of saying these things are in my control and these things aren't. He gives a few examples here. He says, under our control are our opinions, desires, aversions, so the things that we sort of are against, and generally our own actions. Not under our control are our bodies, our property, our reputation, so that's the thing that you mentioned, as well as social status, and generally the things that are not our own actions. So there's things that we do in the world. We have emotions and stuff, and I mean, whether those emotions are fully under our control is not really going to dig into that. You can go and listen to a previous episode on how emotions are made. But we do have, in some sense, some agency over like in the long term how we act out and do things. And Epictetus is basically saying those things that are under your control, your opinions, the things that you desire, the things that you don't want, those are things that you can take almost action on. Those are the things that you, when you do things in the world, when you act in the world, those are the things that you have control over. Whereas things like other people's opinion, you don't have control over it, so don't worry about it. He goes on a bit further down to say, if you see only what is truly your own as yours and recognize what belongs to others as theirs, no one will be able to force you or stop you. You will not blame anyone, you will not accuse anyone, and you will not act against your will. A little bit further down, if you aim for such significant achievements, remember that they require considerable effort. You must let go of some things entirely and postpone others. And then he wraps up with, if it concerns something beyond your control, be ready to declare that it does not affect you. So basically that mindset of those things that are outside of my control, I'm not going to let them affect me. Even if they seem very negative, they shouldn't affect me. Yeah. Lesson 1. We could end there almost and then just think about that for a while. But yeah. Should we go on to the next one? I've got lesson 4 here. I don't know if you want.
I have 3.
Okay, let's touch on 3.
So 3, I'll just read the open sentence, which says, for everything that brings you joy, satisfies a need, or is loved, remember to consider its true nature, starting from the smallest things. So, I mean, I think it goes on to, I mean to say, he says some stuff which I'm like, I'll take with a pinch of salt type of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah. But I mean, it's all about what I'm referring to here is about like the death of a spouse or the death of a child, which he kind of says.
Yeah, that's a little bit extreme.
You know, that if they pass away, then you'll not be devastated. Or I won't say that. I think, and I think we've mentioned it in previous episodes that, you know, we don't truly know how that, I think it was probably emotions, and we don't know how truly something feels if you haven't experienced it. You know, so that to me I kind of glaze over. But the reason why I quoted the first part is that I think we need to be so aware of the consequences of things that we enjoy. You know, we enjoy certain things not knowing how they affect us in the long run. You know, I mean, for instance, when you're at a social gathering, you might enjoy 1 too many drinks. You know, you don't know how that affects you.
Yeah.
You know, you might enjoy fast food. So, you know, you don't know how that, you know. So in understanding, you know, even the smallest things involved in what it is that you enjoy. I mean, I've mentioned like food and all, but can be a whole lot of other things. You know, it's important to drill down, and I think it gives you insight on whether you're going down the right path or not, you know, whether to carry on doing that or not. So it's very important. I mean, I think that even goes to the crowd you keep around. You know, you really need to truly know who they are as human beings, because it's very easy for certain behaviors to be transferred without you actually realizing, and all of a sudden you're okay doing certain things which, you know, you actually shouldn't be. So yeah, for me that was just one that stood out, and I thought, I
actually like the example that he uses in the middle of the cup. So he's like, basically he says, if you have a fancy cup, just remind yourself that it's just a fancy cup, because if it breaks, you shouldn't let that upset you. Whereas often we do let those kind of things get to us. And it's not something that's really in our control. If it breaks, we somewhere else he says we should take care of the things that are sort of that we he almost refers it to as things that we look after. So if you have a house, you should take care of that house. If it's your house, whether you're renting it or you own it, you should act as though it isn't yours. You should act as though
it will be returned or something along those lines.
Yeah, as though you are using it and it's yours for a time, but it will be given to someone else later. Maybe it's taken from you, and that's okay. And whereas most of the time we hold on to our possessions extremely tightly, and that goes against that dichotomy of control, because you don't have control of if you lose your job and things. You should act in the world in a way that what they would say is aligns with nature, which is maybe I should very quickly define that, because it's a helpful thing that they refer to quite a lot. So I've got a short definition here. In Stoic philosophy, nature refers to the rational and orderly structure of the universe, encompassing both the physical world and human nature. It emphasizes living in harmony with this nature, with this natural order, by acting rationally and virtuously, as humans are inherently rational beings. This involves practicing wisdom, self-control, justice, and courage to align one's life with nature. So I think the key thing there is rationality and being virtuous. So being almost what we would loosely call a good human being. And I think if we're able to do that and align ourselves with what the Stoics would call nature, then we are able to face those things without it affecting us as much. I know that was a bit of a convoluted way of saying it. Just picture the cup and don't be upset if your cup breaks. Cool. Shall we go on to 4?
Yes.
Okay. In 4, he says, before you start any activity, remind yourself of the nature of that activity. And then he goes on to say, anticipating these possibilities. So that he uses an example. He says, for if you're going to bathe, consider what typically happens in a bathhouse. People splash water and push each other and argue, and some might steal. And so he says, anticipate those possibilities. And then, if any obstacles arise, you can remind yourself that your goal is not just to bathe or insert any other activity here, but also to keep your will aligned with nature. Or put differently, your goal is not just to take a bath. In that day, public bathhouses were a common thing, or at least in Greece, I think. And so the goal is not just to end up taking a bath, but it's actually, more importantly, your goal should be to keep aligned with nature, to say it differently, to remain a virtuous person, to remain a good person. Yeah. So I think there's not too much more to say there than, think about what might happen. And take into account if you're gonna do something.
It's more like thinking of all possibilities that may happen the moment you step out of your house. Just as an example, that you know that there are certain things that are beyond your control. You know, you might. We live in PE. You might step out. And all of a sudden it starts raining, and then the sun comes out. You know, you might not have been dressed appropriately, but there's no point being mad about that, because you know the nature of the city you live in. I think that's just one way to put it.
And I think there's many things. If you're going to do something, think of the good and the bad, and come to terms with, if the bad thing happens, I'm okay with it. I'm not gonna let it affect me. I'm gonna still remain keeping my will aligned with nature.
I think funny you say that. I think in one of the last chapters he actually says it as you put it, that, you know, if you're doing something and it goes your way, you know, be happy that it has, but when it doesn't, don't be sad or anything. Just feel like, okay, that was a possibility that it might happen, and then move on. You know, it's again, very interesting way to think about life, but I think it kind of shields us from a lot, especially not that we're not supposed to experience like hurt or disappointment, but I think it's helpful in the sense that you're able to pick yourself up after that almost instantly. You're like, okay, this has happened, great. It might not be great, but what next? It does. It instills that sort of mentality. The more you suck into something, trying to figure out why it went wrong, whatnot. I think he kind of puts forth that from his lessons that things are bound to go wrong. But just because they have, it doesn't mean you fixate on that. Rather, just pick yourself up and then move on to the next thing.
And I think it's a very helpful idea. I don't think I would go as extreme as the Stoics to say like it shouldn't bother you at all. I think acknowledging that we're humans and that things affect us is fine, and I think it can be actually good, because otherwise we run the risk of bottling up those emotions and pretending like we are actually very stoic when maybe we haven't developed that stoic muscle yet. But so I think it's fine to experience those pains, but the Stoics would say, no, you shouldn't actually let those affect you at all. But I think that general idea is really helpful and good, and most people should try and aim for it more than they do. Most of the time we just sort of, something happens, we react. Something happens, we react. Cool. Okay. Should we go to lesson 5?
Okay.
So lesson 5 is people are not disturbed by events themselves, but by their opinions of those events. Then he says a little bit later, an uneducated person blames others for their problems. Someone who has started to learn blames themselves, and someone who is fully educated blames neither others nor themselves. There's actually quite a few lessons, and maybe I'll just read the headlines, but let's discuss that first a bit, and then I'll just read some of the headlines of the other lessons that kind of touch on the same things. What are your thoughts, Peter?
The last bit is the one that kind of I'm like, okay.
No, I think I agree with the last bit.
Yeah, I'm trying to let it sink in.
I think they also mean, maybe for context, they mean
an external event.
Well, but they mean when you educated in the philosophy of Stoicism, then you will realize that things happen in the world. You won't necessarily blame others nor yourself.
Yeah, that part I get. But I meant, what if an event is a result of your actions?
Yeah, I think I would... I don't know that much about Stoicism, to be fair, but I would imagine that they would still say you should take the blame for that. Because I think this is maybe more talking about events that events,
are like things beyond your control.
Exactly. Yeah.
In that regard, I agree with that, because and I think it's something we spoke about when you're looking at that first lesson. That I think what they're trying to say is to be able to discern that this event has completely nothing to do with me or someone else.
Yeah.
Not just placing blame for the sake of placing blame. Because like I said, what if the event is a result of someone's action?
Yeah.
You should be able to say, okay, it won't affect me because it wasn't my action, but it might be an event that needs, to be dealt with, But yeah, I think it's kind of the whole, going back to like things happen. You can step out your place and like something happens that you completely hadn't planned for. So in that regard,
I think maybe an interesting example, and maybe it doesn't work out as well as I think it will, but if you were to lose your job, I think that's something initially we'd be like, oh my gosh, and you would blame others. You'd be like, I can't believe it. And then what I think Epictetus would say is, as you learn more about that dichotomy of control and things like that, you'll start learning, oh, okay, I'm actually responsible for this. And then over time you can say, oh no, these kind of things happen. I mean, hopefully you've put in the effort that you required and you've played your part, and whatever economic circumstances happen so that you let go of your job, it's outside of your control, and I'm not going to blame the company. They weren't intending to necessarily be super mean or anything. It's just they needed to let some people go. They let some people go. It's unfortunate, but I'm not going to let that affect me. Much more difficult, I think. Luckily, you and I have fairly stable jobs and things, so I think it's a lot more difficult if it's actually facing that practical reality. But I think that's possibly the kind of thing that he would be saying. Then
in that regard, I agree.
And then maybe just I'll quickly read through some of those other lessons. So lesson 8.
I was gonna say start with 6, 7, and 8 because I had 6.
You go 6, 7, and then
okay. So 6. I'll also just read the opening. It says, "Do not take pride in any advantage that belongs to someone else," and it talks about if a horse boasts about its beauty, it might be understandable, but if you then but when you boast about having a beautiful horse, it's like one of those. It's like it's not yours to take pride in. It's the horse's features, not yours.
He says, remember, you're proud of the horse, not yourself.
Yes. And then in the last bit it says, therefore, if you conform to nature in how you perceive and react to things, then you can be proud because you are taking pride in something genuinely your own, and I think, it also goes about, I want to say beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Like you look at someone and you be like, oh, they're beautiful. Someone might have a totally different opinion of them. Then if you hear that probably might stir you up, but that's not the case. Everyone perceives things differently. That's what you're supposed to take pride in, not how you perceive it, not, kind of boasting about what others possess, essentially.
I think that nature thing, where if you conform to nature, so in other words, if you act rationally and virtuously, then you can take pride in that, is kind of almost a summary there at the end. Like that's the thing that you can take pride in, but don't take pride in things that you don't have control over. If you won the lotto, like don't take pride in that, because you can be happy. Yeah. Although it's dangerous to probably win the lotto, but discussion for another day.
Okay. No, we can skip 7 and then you can go to 8.
Cool. Yeah, I'll maybe quick fire read through, because it's lesson 8, 20, 32, 48, and 23. So maybe I'll quick fire read, because they all kind of relate to that. The general broad lesson of people are not disturbed by events themselves, but their opinions of the events. So I'll run through them quickly and then we can chat. So lesson 8, don't wish for events to happen as you desire. Instead, wish for events to unfold as they do, and you will live a peaceful life. Then lesson 20 says, when someone irritates you, understand that it is your own perception causing that irritation. So in other words, you shouldn't be thinking that they are just irritating. It's your perception of them that is the thing that you are saying is irritating. And then, so that's lesson 20. Lesson 32, remember that you have the power to respond well to any outcome, and no one can take that away from you. Then lesson 40, the uninstructed person looks for benefits or harm from external things, while the philosopher expects all benefit and harm to come from within himself. Then put a note there that I should read through that full one. Let me quickly hop over to it. So that's 48. So he says, yeah. The uninstructed person looks for benefit or harm from external things, while the philosopher expects all benefit and harm to come from within himself. Signs of progress in a philosopher include not criticizing or praising others, not blaming or accusing anyone, and not boasting about oneself or one's knowledge. When faced with obstacles, he blames himself. If praised, he laughs it off internally. If criticized, he does not defend himself. He moves cautiously, avoiding actions until he's certain that they are correct. He eliminates all desires and directs his aversions only towards the things within his control that are contrary to nature. He approaches everything with moderation and doesn't mind if others think he's foolish or ignorant. In essence, he monitors himself closely and watching himself, and as if watching an enemy lying in wait. And then lastly, if you ever find yourself focusing on external things to please someone else, realize that you've lost your true purpose in life. So yeah, those are super quick highlight reels of all under that same category, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
Don't be disturbed by the events, or we aren't actually disturbed by the events themselves. We think we are, but we are actually disturbed by the opinions, our opinions of those events. That's the thing that causes annoyance or irritation or distress, all of those kinds of things. Yeah. Any comments there before we move on?
No, just read the last one. I think I had it highlighted. I just won't scroll.
Yeah. So lesson 23, if you ever find yourself focusing on external things to please someone else, realize that you've lost your true purpose in life.
Yeah. I think so often, I think with that, what also makes it a bit skew is if you kind of go against your values. You know, you start doing things just because you think the next person will like it. You know, I think that's very dangerous in many ways. So that's also something I kind of made note of, to be like, I think most people need to be aware of this, you know. Yeah,
I really like that idea of where we often want to do things. So maybe we want to build, to use the software world, maybe we want to build an app to become like rich and famous kind of thing. And realize that you are doing that not to please yourself. That's not like, if you were to have all the money and things in the world, like, would you choose to do that? No, you would choose to build a useful app. If you wanted to build an app, you wouldn't choose to build an app that everyone's like, wow, this is the thing and here's lots of money, because that wouldn't matter to you. So if you're focusing on those things, realize you've lost your true purpose. It's just good job, Epictetus. Cool. I've got 13. I don't know if you have any before.
No, I have 15, so we can go 13.
Cool. So 13 says, if you want to improve, be willing to be seen as senseless and foolish regarding external matters. Be prepared to be thought of as knowing nothing. If you start to seem important to others, be wary of yourself. Understand that it's difficult to maintain both. The rest doesn't matter too much, but basically that idea of, if you starting to seem important, be wary of yourself, because the way that you improve is just by accepting that you will make mistakes and things like that, and that's fine. Yeah. I've got 14 as well.
Okay.
So 14, sort of towards the middle, it says, the person who holds power over the things that another person wishes or fears becomes the master of that person. Therefore, if you want to be free, do not wish for or avoid anything that depends on others. If you don't follow this rule, you will remain a slave. So, yeah, I think the modern way of saying it would be, don't be enslaved by the things that you desire.
Yeah.
Or by the things that you try to avoid. Because they often also talk about that opposite side. Not just the things that you want, but the things that you want to avoid. Those can also be things that aren't under your control. And we try and have them under our control. And the at the end there, if you don't follow this rule, you will remain a slave. The interesting thing is, I don't know when this was written. It was probably written after he was freed as a slave. So he was a slave, then he was freed. But it's interesting to put yourself in the mindset of him being a slave. And when he's talking about slavery here, he's talking obviously about like bondage to things that we desire and that. But there's also an element of like what it feels like to be a slave is more tangible to him. And so he's saying, if you say, for example, someone has things that you want, if you focus on those things and you desire those things, that you are a slave to that person or to that thing.
I mean, even like example would be like as kids, you know someone with a toy that you really like, you always want to be around them. And I mean, they can say anything, for you to get to play with the toy, and you most likely do it because you want to play that toy. That's just an example. I mean, in the Christian world as well, that's like, there's always a reference to us being slaves to our sin. It's that concept of the important bit that which has got me thinking though is the whole also being enslaved to things you're trying to avoid. I think that's something that doesn't get a lot of reference. I mean, for me as well, I had one of those of like, that's actually a point that's not made often, that the more you think about avoiding something, the more you actually have it lingering around. And I think if you're trying to avoid something, you're fighting against something. Which is quite interesting that in the end you're enslaved to you trying to avoid something.
You can be enslaved by that too. It's a very helpful concept. Because like you say, we don't often think about it in that way. Don't be enslaved to the things you avoid. Cool. Should we go to 15?
15. So 15, it starts with, remember that in life you should act as you would at a banquet. If something is offered to you, take your share politely. If it passes you, let it go. If it hasn't reached you yet, don't reach out for it, but wait until it comes to you. That's also very interesting, I think there's the whole pray until something happens, wait until something happens, some interesting quotes that are out there. But I think it's true, because reaching for something that hasn't got into you, it's like what stops you to taking things that are not yours. It's kind of very similar. I mean, it says you should apply the same to other things, approach to like children, spouse, positions of authority and wealth. If you do, you will eventually be a worthy guest at the banquet of the God. It's like, I would classify this as patience. Being able to know when the right time is.
I would classify it as being stoic. Accepting things. I agree with you, though. It's definitely an element of patience. But it's also that element of just accepting things for the way that they are. Not reaching for something that isn't yours, but accepting the things that come to you. And if wealth comes to you, that's great. If you lose your house, that's fine as well. I'm not saying I'd be happy with it. I'm just saying that's what the Stoics. Difficult to achieve in real life, though, but act like you're at a banquet. I have 28 next. I don't know if you have any in between.
I had 26.
Yeah, go for it.
It says we can understand nature's intention for the things that we all experience similarly. For example, when your neighbor's slaves breaks a cup, we as the slave say it's just something that happens. Remember this when your own cup breaks. I think we had the cup reference earlier, but this kind of is out. Also classified, as you were saying, it's stoicism, but it's more of put yourself in other people's shoes kind of thing.
That's a good way of summarizing.
I think we're quick to, again, it talks about reacting is not, is like people's reactions or something that don't concern you, but we quick to say things without fully understanding what's going on. You know, just because you're not in that situation, we're able to quickly come with solutions and whatnot, but we forget that in that moment, there just might be a lot more that's going on internally with that person, you know? So, yeah, I thought that was a good lesson to say, if a slave breaks, you know, a cup, you know, you're like, okay, cup is broken, you know, like, be kind to the slave. But now think, like, if that was your cup, would you react the same way, you know? So, yeah, it is important to sympathize with others or put yourself in other people's shoes first before you kind of comment on their reactions, essentially.
I mean, obviously we're not condoning slavery. It's just but I like the idea of also, he's not really saying this directly here, but it's if you were to have a slave or someone that you almost see as lower than you, and they do something, normally what we would do is we'd just be like, oh, I can't believe this person did it, and you get upset at them and stuff. But then if it's in a different situation, then you might be fine with it. And that's one interesting thing to, like, I think it's, and I'm sure Epictetus would say something like this, where I don't know for sure, but I would assume, where the idea of being a slave and being a king or a ruler, I don't think we should view them as differently. So that's one thing, because they're both just human beings and things. But then at the other side of it is just that idea of not only, or maybe let me rephrase it, the idea of when something happens to us, trying to gain perspective and be more stoic by looking at, if this were to happen to someone that has no affiliation to me, they're just some random person, like I read it in the news or something, and I read it and I react to it like, oh, you know, it's difficult, but they must now sort of move on with their lives and something like that. If we react to it like that, then we should look at ourselves and say, am I overreacting, or am I actually reacting appropriately? And if I look at it and I look at that newspaper article and I read something that happened and I'm like, oh, that's unfortunate, but I guess it happens in life. And then when it happens to us, we react very differently. There's an inconsistency there. And so they're saying, when you experience those things, reflect on how others are, how you would, not just how others experience it, but how you would evaluate when it was to happen to someone who is completely irrelevant to you in general. And there's obviously also caveats there, because you can't take on all the sympathy in the world or the empathy in the world, because if you were to, every time someone gets murdered, if you were to feel the way that if your someone close to you was murdered, like, you wouldn't be able to live, because it's happening way too often than is good. But, well, not that it's ever good, but anyway, I think I've jumbled myself enough there.
You haven't gotten cancelled yet, but
okay, should we go to 28?
Yeah.
28 says, if someone intended to put your body under the control of anyone you encountered, you would be upset. Yet you allow your mind to be controlled by anyone you meet. So if they insult you, your peace is disturbed. Why aren't you ashamed of this? So, yeah, I think that's another helpful way to view things. If someone was to take control of your body, you wouldn't be happy with that. But yet, people say things and you effectively allow them to take control of your mind, because you're so disturbed by those things or upset that, you're essentially letting them control your mind. So be stoic.
The favorite line today.
I wonder why. Yeah. Should we go to 30?
Okay.
So this is another really helpful one. I'll read through it in pieces and then we can chat through it at the end. So duties are determined by relationships. Then he goes on to say, if a brother wrongs you, focus on maintaining your role towards him, not on his actions. Ensure that your will is in line with nature. Others cannot harm you unless you allow it. You are harmed only when you believe you are harmed.
Well,
and then he concludes by saying, by considering your relationships, you can understand your duties as a neighbor, a citizen, or a general. Contemplate these relationships to discover your obligations. I really like that line. Contemplate those relationships to discover your obligations. So, thinking about the brother example, that in some sense you are obligated to you through that relationship of being a brother. You are obligated to help and support and do things for that brother that you wouldn't do for some random person that you come across. And because of that relationship, that should determine what your obligations are, not whether they cause you harm or not. And obviously that can be very difficult in certain situations, but I think it's a good guiding principle. I wouldn't say it's a rule, but yeah.
Good guide.
Right. Should we go on to 33, or do you have another one?
Yes, I also had 33.
Okay.
Go for it. I will pick it back up.
So 33, establish a clear character and code of conduct for yourself that you follow both in solitude and in the company of others. So there's actually a few little things that I'll go through here. I'll just read through them all and then we can chat. So establishing the code of conduct for yourself that you follow in solitude and in the company of others. Generally keep silent unless it's necessary to speak, and then use few words. Speak rarely and only when the situation requires it. Avoiding common topics like gladiators, horse races, athletes, food and drink, especially avoiding gossiping about people, whether to criticize, praise, or compare them. And he goes on to say, try not to swear oaths if possible. If unavoidable, limit them as much as you can. And then later he says, remember that associating with impure people can tarnish your own character, even if you strive to remain pure. Then if somebody tells you that another person has spoken ill of you, do not defend yourself. Instead say, that person doesn't know all of my faults. Otherwise they would have mentioned more. And then lastly, Stay away from obscene talk. If someone starts such a conversation, rebuke them if it's appropriate. If not, show your disapproval through silence, blushing, or a displeased expression. I think that last one is one of the most difficult. Like if you disagree with someone in a conversation, but it's not appropriate to like often we'll react like, oh yeah, haha, kind of thing. But actually we shouldn't react like that if we genuinely disapprove of the thing that they're saying. I wouldn't say disagree, like more specifically disapprove. I think we should be stronger in character to be able to be like, no, I disagree with that. Simple as that. You know, it's not something, I'm not trying to offend you or anything like that. I just don't think that that's a good thing. And I think it goes back to that this opening line of the clear character and code of conduct that you should follow both in solitude and in the company of others.
Funny enough, you know, I don't know if you ever remember when we started. No, actually, you started a year after me. But when we started first year, the orientation for orientation, we went to Missionville and we all handed Long Walk to Freedom, and one of the questions was, what is character? And funny enough, I actually remember the guy that answered this question. Like, we're actually in the same programming class after that. But yeah, he's defined character as something that you do when no one's looking. You know, that's what determines a character. And the opening line was exactly that. To say that, you know, your code of conduct should be the same whether in public or, you know, when you're on your own. And yeah, I mean, you can't have that in your comfort of your own house, or when you're alone, you do certain things, and the moment you're in public, I mean, that's just you contradicting yourself, and I think that's just an internal battle, you know. And I mean, like you said, that it's hard in certain instances, but we need to strive to do that. That if we, amongst friends, and there's a conversation that you don't agree with, you know, we should almost always stand up for what we believe in and say, look, I don't agree with that, you know, instead of just laughing off, which is the easiest and common thing that we actually do.
And I think it ties into a lot of things, because if you are able to have that consistency of character in private and in public, your life just becomes a whole lot simpler, because that's who you are. It's not like, oh, I'm like this when I'm with this person, when I'm like this when I'm with this person. And so that's, I think, ties back to the gossip thing as well, where like if you're gossiping a lot, it's a strange thing, because you wouldn't do it in public, and yet you sometimes do it in private, and then if that were to be revealed, you would be ashamed, but yet you do it in private. And I think there's a lot of things like that. And I mean, life is really complicated, because at the same time, I think gossip can serve a social function, like on a broad scale. The concept of gossip allows people to act more morally, ironically, because of the fact that on a broad scale, that someone might gossip about you, which is very funny. That I think it does serve a purpose, but at the same time, I wouldn't encourage gossiping. Life is very complicated.
I've never looked at it.
Yeah, I read. I don't think I read the book yet, but I wanted to read the book, and then I listened to like a excerpt of it, and then it spoke about that, and I was like, oh. Yeah, I don't know what to make of it, but everything, well, a lot of things have their place, even though they might not be good. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Should we go to lesson 34?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you feel the allure of any pleasure, resist it resist being swept away by it. So let me start it again. When you feel the allure of any pleasure, resist being swept away by it. Let the impulse wait and give yourself a moment to pause. Consider both the moment of enjoying the pleasure and the time after when you might regret and criticize yourself. Compare these with the satisfaction and self-praise you'll feel if you resist the temptation. If you decide it's appropriate to indulge, be mindful that the charm and attraction of the pleasure doesn't overpower you. Instead, focus on how much better it feels to know that you've exercised self-control and won over temptation. So, I think just giving yourself a moment to think, like for me, a weak point is sweets. Love sweets. But if every time I wanted to have a sweet, if I thought about and evaluated the situation and said, is it going to be a good idea for me to have a sweet now for the long term? And if I haven't had a sweet in that day or the last 2 days or something like that, maybe it's fine. Like, have a sweet, don't not enjoy life at all. But if you've had like 2 sweets, 3 sweets that day, and now you're like, should I have the sweet? And if I evaluate, is it going to be good? I'll enjoy it now, but in the long term, is it a good thing? I'll probably end up being like, no, I shouldn't have the sweet. Let me rather wait and then be happy that I managed to resist the temptation. Yeah. Or ideally, don't allow yourself to have the temptation at all by not having sweets in your cupboard. That's a better approach for the marshmallow test things. Test. But it's a good thing to think about, I think. Give yourself time to think.
It's the whole thing, like your last part, it's, with habits, the one point was make it easy. So make sure it's in your face. But if you're trying to quit something, then you make it difficult.
Yeah.
Like you say, instead of stocking up on sweets, rather not have sweets at all. I mean, I think that's one thing I do. Like, I stop buying snacks. Like, if I buy snacks, it's like either I'm hosting or, maybe I'm really feeling like, but I hardly buy snacks. Like, I can go months on months.
I know, I'm very bad with it. Jamie at least kind of keeps me
at bay.
Although I still rebel a little bit. But yeah. Okay, I only have one more, which is 52. But if you have ones in between that, then
35. So, cool. When you've determined to do something, should be done, and the process of doing it, don't shy away from being seen, even if others might judge you negatively. If the action is wrong, avoid it altogether. But if it's right, why fear the misguided criticism of others? I think we've touched on something similar, but it just, again, it goes back to people's perception of you will be what it is, and just don't let it keep you from doing what you want and what you should do. And I think it's so often, I feel like so many people have been held back or have held themselves back from doing things just because of what others might think. Which isn't great. I think if we know it's right and it feels right, then we need to do it.
Or even if we know it's right and it doesn't feel right, like if you feel uncomfortable about it, because like the same reason that he's saying here, if you don't want to do it and in public but you know it's the right thing to do, then I think of the example of the like going up to a stranger and saying something that's like uncomfortable to say, like maybe, I don't know, something like maybe someone has a wig or something and then their wig is falling off. No one's going to say anything to them. But if it's the right thing to do, because it'll help keep that person's dignity or something like that, then you should try and have the courage to act in that situation. I'm sure that there's better examples, but yeah, there's lots of little things like that I agree we just avoid because it's uncomfortable or difficult to do, and so we fear criticism for doing something, and so we don't do it even though we know it's right to do. Kind of goes back to that lesson 23. If you ever find yourself focusing on external things to please someone else, realize that you've lost your true purpose in life. So
I mean, the next one I'll probably just cruise to them is 37. So if you've taken on a role beyond your abilities, you've not only acted inappropriately, but also neglected what you could have successfully accomplished. And I think we spoke something similar to this in the last podcast, that when we plan in work, plan what we can manage, even try to dumb it down a bit instead of taking on too much. But I just feel like so often we want to be bright stars and, raise up our hands to help out with a lot of things when we really don't have the capacity to do it. Exactly, and I mean that we not only fail at that, but we then don't do what we could actually have accomplished. Maybe there might be a role that was better suited for us, So we really need to. I think that's a great lesson. I don't know if you have something to add.
Yeah, I think it is a vital lesson, and there are, as with a lot of things, there's caveats. Like one thing would be saying, okay, but what about someone who wants, like, you put them in a role to have them grow into a role. And I think that's still a valuable thing to do. So it's not that you should never sort of push a little bit more to, if someone is wanting to learn and grow, put them in situations that are ever so slightly outside of their comfort zone to help them grow and things like that. But I think the example that you used of like taking on more than you can, I think that's a really good example, because those are the situations where it's not stepping a little bit outside of our comfort zone. It's taking on something that's completely unreasonable for us. And there's no logical situation or rational situation where it's like, this makes sense to do and you'll comfortably be able to do that. Or even not necessarily comfortably, just like it's within your realm of these are the things that you're good at, and maybe a tiny bit stretch, that's completely fine. But if you're taking on like crazy large workload, you're gonna fail. And like you said, you not only are failing, but you're wasting the opportunity that you had to achieve other things which could be very valuable and that you could have achieved, but instead you waste that. Super vital lesson.
I don't know, did you have 42 in that list of
I had 48 in the list.
Okay, not 42. Okay, so 42 says, when someone treats you poorly or speaks ill of you, remember that they act this way because they believe it is the right thing to do. They can't act accordingly to what you think is right, but only according to their own beliefs. So essentially with this it's one of those 2-foot things, but I think in the end it kind of says So just as someone who misjudges a true statement is harmed by their mistake, not the statement itself, the person who wrongs you is harmed by their own misguided views. Keep this in mind. You can respond with patience and understanding, thinking to yourself, this is how it seemed to them. That regardless of whether, someone treats you poorly or not, there should be that reflection of, was that right or wrong? That still needs to be, So again, we don't need to take away the fact that someone's harmed in the process, as it says. The first bit, before you get to that point, is just understanding that the reason they've acted this way is because of what they believe, and I think that also helps with when it comes to forgiving people. That they might either have done something just out of pure malice, or they didn't know better. Yeah. I think it's. I think so often we treat people without that grace.
Yeah.
I think that grace is needed from time to time.
Yeah. I think it's like if someone's trying to learn, like take us for example. Now we are reading the book about we're reading the Enchiridion and we're trying to learn about it and stuff, and we might get some things wrong and misunderstand some topics and things like that, but at the end of the day we're just trying to learn and grow. And I think often what people will do is they will, especially if you're coming from an extremely academic background where it's like very factual and stuff like that, you almost just constantly on the tack, like, that person's wrong about that and they're wrong about this, and it's, I can't believe this, where it's actually just like, it's okay, they might be slightly harmed by their misunderstanding of the thing, but on the broad spectrum it's going to be fine. And you shouldn't let that sort of grate you if you the person that understands more about a topic. Let that person learn and grow, and
And then the other one is 44. This I thought was interesting. So it says, these arguments do not make sense. I am richer than you, therefore I am better than you. I am more eloquent than you, therefore I am better than you. Instead, the logical conclusions are, I am richer than you, therefore I have more possessions than you. And I am more eloquent than you, therefore my speech is better than yours. However, you are neither defined by your possessions nor your speech. I think with that, I've noticed, there's the one thing that people believe, just because, again, people assume that you being an eloquent speaker makes you smart. It might just mean you're confident. And I think most people that are eloquent speakers, sorry to say this, are people that lead other people astray, because they say things with such conviction and confidence, but doesn't mean that, again, it's true. You still need to sit down and reevaluate what they actually said and come to your own conclusion, Something with that, just because someone's richer doesn't mean they're better than you. They might be not sleeping, stressing themselves out, yet you may not have much, but you're much happier than they are,
or they could be a morally bankrupt person or something. That's not to say that all rich people are. There's some very nice and kind and good rich people, but but I think it doesn't, like you're saying, they don't equate to one another. And I think that's an important,
if you're listening, lesson. My bank account is.
No, it's a very good lesson, and I think the being more eloquent than you and leading astray. It's also, you get those. It's quite funny to see those. You get the YouTube videos and that they have this music and this pace of talking that's a very authoritative and captivating way of presenting information, but often like it can be sort of not really valuable information, or like you say, even worse, leading people astray. And so it's eloquence doesn't always equal value or virtuous character and those kind of things. Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
There's one more you said you had.
Yes. So 52. So towards the end, or actually, I'll throw in 49 as well. I like this one just because it's a dig at people who have really fancy writing. So when someone feels proud because they can understand and explain Chrysippus's writing, remind yourself that if Chrysippus had written more clearly, this person would have nothing to be proud of. There's no pride in merely understanding interpretation. The real achievement lies in applying these teachings. So if someone asks you to read Chrysippus to them, you should feel embarrassed if you cannot demonstrate the actions that align with his teachings. So there's two parts there. The one is like, if you are trying to explain something, do it clearly. Don't try and mask your words in fancy, or mask your idea or your teaching or lesson in fancy words. And at the same time, when you are learning something, so if we read all these books and we come to understand all these concepts, but we don't apply it to our lives, then, or at least don't apply the things that we see as like, this is good to apply. If we don't apply those things, then we are wasting our time. In fact, we are more to be pitied because like we think we know what we're talking about, but actually our actions don't show that. Yeah. I think, if I remember correctly, that 52 leads into that. So 52 says, the most important and fundamental part of philosophy is applying its principles, such as the idea that we must not lie. The second part involves understanding why these principles are true, like proving why we shouldn't lie. And the third part is about explaining and supporting these proofs. So there's three parts. The one is the most important part, which is applying the principles. The second is understanding them. And the third is explaining and supporting. And then he concludes by saying, however, we often do the opposite. We spend most of our time on the third part, focusing all of our efforts there, and neglect the first part entirely. As a result, we still lie, and even though we have all the arguments ready to prove why we shouldn't. So, the most important part, to repeat, the most important and fundamental part of philosophy is applying its principle. You should be able to support it, you should be able to do all those things.
But fundamental is what's important.
Yeah.
And I believe that's in everything. If you have the fundamentals of any given field, the rest should come naturally. Not naturally, but the rest should follow. Again, like he says that there are those three parts to not lying, but people are so often trying to support, why it is that they're not lying, instead of just sticking to the first thing and say, I did not lie.
Yeah. Or not support why they aren't, but support why they shouldn't lie.
Yeah.
Like, of course you shouldn't lie for this and this reason. But yet, if you just don't lie, that's going to be way better for everyone. Yeah. Cool. Should we do some concluding thoughts and then wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, it was a different read, but at the same time, I think useful. It has a lot of lessons. I probably will go through it over and over again.
That's what it's for. It's a handbook.
It's a handbook. But yeah. And it's going to be, I mean, we have another book in the same kind of category, and I'm sure it'll be a harder read, but I am looking forward to it. Just something a little different from what we used to.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of change coming. So that change, I think,
gonna need some new lessons.
New lessons
to equip you for the future.
Maybe I find newer things more interesting than what I'm used to. I mean, my one friend was saying that I'm a creature of habit, so everything happening is like so shocking. So yeah, I think it came at the right time. And yeah, a lot of golden nuggets. I'd say if you've got the chance, I mean, you don't have to like read through it entirely. Like, just open a page and just read what's there. I don't think you need to read it, you know, from start to end. You know, you can read a lesson at a time, and you still get a lot out of it.
And I mean, I think. The one that we have is like 30 pages or something. So if you've listened to this whole podcast, you could have read the book. And I would, having concluded the podcast, I would encourage you to have done the reading of it first and then listen to the podcast rather. But here we are, you know. So no, but I agree. I think it's a really helpful book. I think it is what it says on the cover, the Enchiridion, the Handbook, and I think that there are lots of lessons, some things that don't directly apply to us because of it's over 2,000 years old, so it's in a slightly different world, but at the same time, surprisingly still like relevant. Most of it is still very relevant, and I think Stoicism has been and has become again more popular because of those reasons why it is very applicable. And I think I'd conclude with the general idea of that dichotomy of control. Like, some things are in our control, some things are not. Try and focus on becoming better at those things that are within your control, and try and let go more of the things that are not within your control. And just the general sort of idea of cultivating virtue and living in harmony with nature, and meaning virtue and rationality in that. And then those, what they call cardinal virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. I think those are, if we focus on those things rather than focusing on pleasing others and doing what's right for fame or fortune, then I think we will be a lot happier, and we will be more valuable to society, I guess. Cool. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, James.
Chat again.
Cool.